Hi, I'm Megan and I'm a MindMate Ambassador for Leeds.
Hello, I'm Rachel and I am one of the MindMate Ambassadors for Leeds.
My personal experience of self-injury is something that I still struggle with and have done for a number of years now. At my worst, it's led to hospitalisation, antidote treatment, surgery. It's been quite bad. Why I think a high number of young people self-harm these days, well, I think that self-harm is a result of another problem, and young people have a lot of things to be stressed about. School, exams, friends, bullies, social media, all sorts. I also worryingly found quite a large self-harm community on Instagram, and whilst I'm not saying this is a cause, I do feel like social media is massive in young people's lives nowadays, and stuff like this is such an overexposure for young people, and it's almost an encouragement to engage in these kind of risky behaviours.
My personal experience with self-harm was for coping. I had a lot going on from the transition from primary to high school, a lot happening in my family life, and I was also getting bullied on top of that, so for me it was a way to release that. I went through starving myself to cutting myself, and it'd range from the severity of the situation for me to what harm I would do to myself. So I think there's many reasons why people self-harm.
So there's lots of common myths around self-harm, one of those being that it's just attention seeking, which is far from the truth. Actually, a lot of people who self-harm are very private and go to great lengths to hide their injuries, whereas for some people it's actually a way of showing how bad things really are and how actually they're just in need of some help, some understanding and some acceptance. Another common myth around self-harm is that only teenage girls self-harm, whereas actually people of all ages and all genders can self-harm. Whilst it might start in adolescence, people can self-harm way into adulthood. A recent Young Minds survey found that 24% of 16 to 24-year-old males have intentionally injured themselves, and 22% of these did so to cope with an emotion or situation.
One of the most common myths personally for me is that just because you're acting on the self-harm, it doesn't mean you're suicidal, it doesn't mean you have a mental illness, it's just you dealing with the pressures of life.
Another myth about self-harm is that when people self-harm, they don't feel any pain. And for some people, they can become so distressed when they self-harm that they dissociate, and this zoning out can mean that they're not aware of what they're doing, and this means that they might not feel the pain whilst they're doing it, but they definitely feel the pain afterwards. I can vouch for that. Whereas for some people, the pain itself can be the distraction that's needed to get the relief from whatever they're trying to cope with. Another myth about self-harm is that the severity of a person's injuries reflects the severity of the problems that they're dealing with. And this is just completely wrong. It's really important to take a person seriously, regardless of how serious their injuries are. Everyone has different levels of resilience.
Another myth that is very common is that the age you start to self-harm is normally around high school. I've spoke openly with my mum about what I've went through, and we think it actually started in primary school when I was bullying. I'd constantly wash my hands to the point they'd blister.
The last myth that I've got about self-harm is that self-harm is cutting. Whilst cutting is a form of self-harm and it is the most commonly reported ways of self-harm, there are many other ways a person can self-injure, such as headbanging, overdosing, burning, scratching, hair pulling, and many more things.
Another two common myths to do with self-harm is that the person actively who is self-harming is wanting to end their own life. With this, they can go through phases of reckless behaviour where they just don't care about their own life anymore and hope that a bad situation happens to them rather than intending to take their own life themselves. Another form is that the self-harm doesn't just stop, it isn't a phase. The person can relapse quite a lot throughout the entirety of their life.
The Calm Harm app If you haven't heard of it, it's a really great app that has loads of different categories of things to do to help you get through without acting on an urge. So there's different categories like distraction, comfort, breathe, and there's loads of little helpful things that you can try to do to help you cope. Another thing that I use to cope is my comfort box. My care coordinator helped me make this. It's basically a box full of things that I can go to when I'm stressed or things are escalating, and I can get some comfort from it. So in there I've got a really soft blanket, some lavender essential oil, a colouring book, some smooth magnetic stone, things like that, just to go to remind myself that I can look after myself in those moments.
Some of the coping mechanisms I use is walking my dog whilst listening to a podcast, as this gives my brain another focus and rather focusing on the intention to self-harm. Another will be playing with my daughter, as this just calms me down seeing her happy. Another one is listening to music whilst meditating or doing yoga or exercise, as this gives me another coping mechanism that isn't too bad for me.
School staff didn't really play much of a role for me, as I've always been very private about my mental health and my struggles, and I never felt able to open up to anyone at school, unfortunately. If this wasn't the case, it probably would have been helpful, but I did keep things to myself during my time at school.
There wasn't really much help apart from one teacher who helped me get to CAMS when I hit my lowest point, but it was only when I hit my lowest point that happened. A few of the other teachers I felt were the very bad influences in my mental health journey. A memory that comes straight to mind is in year 10. The first day back we were allowed to wear makeup, and over the summer I'd quite badly burnt my face through self-harm. And he stood me up in front of the form and said, "Don't you think she looks like a clown with that much makeup on?" And later that night I attempted my life due to this event happening.
Make an environment where young people feel able to talk to staff about whatever is going on in their life, because if people can't open up, then problems are never going to be solved. So that's a really important one. And then I really want to reiterate that when people do open up, it's so important to take them seriously. Whatever their problem is, no matter how big or small, they need to be made to feel valid and understood and important. That's really a big point to take away, I feel. It's really important to just generally raise awareness through discussion and education about common SEMH issues like self-harm, coping with stress, mental illnesses, different things like that. If we can create an environment where conversation around these topics is normal, then it's just going to be a better place for everyone to be. The MindMate lessons would be a really great way to get these messages out there consistently and make it more commonplace for young people to talk about their mental health without it being taboo or weird or unaccepted by the rest of their peers and their staff. Generally just creating the most supportive environment for young people. Finally, I just want to be in a school where the staff members do really care and go that extra mile to make sure that their students are doing as well as they can be. So that means not waiting until something drastic happens or something really serious. You know, picking up on cues when that child might be a bit out of their norm or something unusual, just really going out of their way to care for their students and make sure that their well-being is paramount.
One of the things I'd campaign for to change would be that teachers take care of themselves as well. It isn't all about the students, and if the teacher's mental health isn't in check, then how are they going to be able to look after the students to the best of their ability? Another thing the schools could introduce is a safe space where if someone is going through crisis or needs wounds attending to through self-harm, or they are just struggling with everyday lessons throughout school, that they could go to this safe space and access a teacher who can thoroughly support them.